Hi, welcome to valuationpodcast.com, a podcast and video series about all things related to business and valuation. My name is Melissa Gragg, and I'm a financial mediator and business valuation expert in St. Louis, Missouri. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Kelly Finnell again. He's one of the top ESOP consultants. He has over 40 years of experience. And today, we're kind of talking about insider information, inside an ESOP deal, how value, regulations, and exit really work in an ESOP. So welcome back, Kelly. How are you doing today?
I'm great, thanks. Nice to be back.
Well, this is awesome. You spoke to us probably a couple of years ago, but I've been having clients come in and wanting to transition their business. And sometimes these are founder businesses or second generation, or they just have these amazing employees. And then they also start to want to buy businesses. And so we're going to kind of talk about some of those things. But in the beginning, when we're just looking at this, this is a valuation podcast. So we want to talk about valuation metrics. One of the things is that ESOPs are typically valued on a yearly basis when they have become ESOPs. But, how do you determine the fair market value when the ESOP is actually buying something and maybe looking at approaching another company?
Well, now we're talking about the very beginning of the ESOP process. A business owner has decided that they want to have a liquidity event. And as part of that event, they want to take care of their employees. So instead of selling to private equity, they sell to the employees via an employee stock ownership plan, or ESOP. And one of their motivations for doing that are the tax benefits of the ESOP, which we could talk about later. But in terms of how fair market value is determined for purposes of this initial ESOP transaction, there is a huge misconception that the trustee hires a valuation firm, and that valuation firm does a valuation, and that establishes the price at which the owner will sell their stock. And that's really not how it works. The trustee does, in fact, hire a valuation advisor. The primary legal responsibility of the trustee is to not pay more than fair market value for the stock that it's purchasing on behalf of the ESOP participants, that is the company's employee. And so what the valuation advisor does is go through a big due diligence and valuation analysis process, and it gives the trustee a number. And that number is the maximum price that the trustee can pay without violating that responsibility to not pay more than fair market value. So the valuation advisor does not establish the price. The valuation advisor establishes the maximum amount the trustee can pay. And then the trustee, which is the buyer in this transaction, has a negotiation with the sellers, that is the current owners of the company. And we represent the sellers through this negotiation process. And our job is to help the seller get as close to that maximum price as we can. Now, of course, the trustee and the valuation advisor have not told us what that number is. So based on our years of experience, we think we can anticipate within about 5% what that number is. And so our job is to negotiate so that the buyer gets the maximum price possible without the trustee violating its obligation to not pay more than fair market value.
Yeah. And if we go back a little bit, a lot of times before a company even decides to become an ESOP, they would reach out to somebody and the owner would say, okay, valuation firm, tell me how much my business is worth, how much can I sell it to and convert it to an ESOP? But that's really a consulting role, because the employees and the fiduciary and the trustee that you talked about are going to have to hire a different company in order to value it on their side. So you kind of have these a lot of different roles that somebody in the ESOP world plays, but a lot of it is still based on valuations, whether you're on the owner side, whether you're on the employee side, like how that kind of gets confusing, I think, for owners, because they think they're hiring the person that's going to value the business for the sale, to the employees. But that's not really the case. It's really a consultant kind of situation. So where do you see business owners kind of getting confused about some of that process?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that they assume on the front end that there's going to be a valuation and that's going to establish the price. And as I said, that's not what happens. And I just described the process that we go through to determine value. One of the things that is a pleasant surprise for most business owners is that an ESOP can pay as much as probably the best offer that they've received from private equity. About 30% of our clients, before they hire us to help them implement an ESOP, they've hired an investment banker to help them sell to private equity. So another misconception that I see in the ESOP world focused on valuation is many business owners assume that a financial buyer in the form of a private equity firm is going to pay more than what an ESOP can pay. And that is almost never the case. And so that is another very pleasant surprise for most business owners.
Well, and when we started this conversation, when we were talking about, kind of the podcast, I had said that we had a client that is an ESOP that is buying an ESOP. And you said that really that doesn't happen a lot, but are there complications when you're kind of combining two ESOPs, or do they sit alone? Do they kind of remain separate entities after the transaction?
That is a very complex transaction when you have one ESOP-owned company buying another one. And one of the most common misconceptions that I see in that situation is that the executive team at the ESOP-owned company that is going to make the acquisition, they sometimes mistakenly assume that their ESOP can buy the stock of the target company. And that can't happen. One of the requirements of an ESOP is that it has to purchase employer securities. Well, that target company is not an employer for the acquirer's ESOP. And so the way it would be structured is one of two ways. Either the company, and this would be the most direct and simple way, the company that has the ESOP, the acquirer in this situation, would buy the target company directly, and then those employees of the target company would become participants in the acquirer's ESOP. So that would be a very straightforward process. The acquirer would probably hire a valuation advisor to help it analyze the price that it should pay for that target company. And there might need to be a fairness opinion, or they might want to have a fairness opinion. And so there would be roles for valuation advisors in that. But there's a wrinkle in this. If the acquirer purchases the stock of the target, then the owner of that target stock cannot make an election under Section 1042 of the code to treat that as a tax-free exchange. And one of the goals, many times, of acquirers that sponsor ESOPs is that they want to dangle that carrot in front of the owner of the target, that this is a tremendous benefit that nobody else can offer them, the ability for them to do this tax-free exchange under Section 1042. So in that situation, we can't have the acquirer purchase the stock of the target directly, because one of the requirements of 1042 is that the ESOP has to be the purchaser. And so we've got that constraint. We've got the constraint that the acquirer's ESOP can't purchase the stock because that's not an employer security. So what we do is we have the target company establish an ESOP, and it can purchase the stock of the owner of Target because that is an employer security. We've got company A purchasing company A's stock from company A's owner. And so now we've got two companies that each have an ESOP. The owner of Target is eligible for 1042 because that was a sale that was made directly to its ESOP. And so now what happens is you merge the two plans. And that's how the deal is culminated, is that those two plans are merged. And of course, you have to have a price established for each of the companies so that you know in the stock exchange that's part of the merger, how many shares of the target are equal to a share of the acquirer. So lots of roles for valuation advisors through this whole process.
Absolutely. And because these ESOPs are valued every year, you sort of have this bogey that, if you're coming in to buy a company and you feel that it's been, maybe overvalued or you don't see that tremendous benefit, there could also be a difficulty in buying that company, not only from all the things that you've talked about, but also because there's these price set, expectations of price done every year, right?
Yeah, we sometimes have companies that have an ESOP that want to sell to a third party, maybe to private equity as part of a roll-up in a particular industry. And so one of the requirements in that situation is that the acquirer has to pay at least fair market value for the shares that are purchased. As you said, the ESOP-owned company is having a valuation each year. And so there needs to be a premium paid by the acquirer to the most recent valuation. And without that premium, you're not going to get the fairness opinion from the trustee that allows this acquisition to happen.
Okay. Well, it kind of brings me back to when you're coming in to, take a company from privately held to become an ESOP. Is the strategic conversation, are those owners thinking about eventually selling in the future? Or are they like this, like we're going to provide for our employees, the employees are going to run this forever? Because it would seem like you would still be creating the ESOP for tax benefits, but eventually it could still be sold, like you said, to private equity, and everybody benefits from that premium sale in the future.
Yeah, almost all of our ESOP clients do not go into it planning to sell to the ESOP so that 10 years from now, the ESOP can sell to private equity. That's almost never the plan, but that does happen because business is very fluid. Things change, industries change, macroeconomic situations change. And so one of the things that we try to make sure our clients understand on the front end is that an ESOP is a business strategy. It's not a lifetime commitment. And so an ESOP can be appropriate today, but perhaps 5 or 10 years from now, it's not appropriate. And it's just really important for the business owners to understand that they've not locked themselves into something that they can't get out of. At the point where the ESOP no longer is consistent with the company's strategic goals, then either you terminate the ESOP or you sell to a third party.
Now, there's been so much going on in the economy with, people working from home, people discontent with their working situations. Have you seen this as a kind of precursor for increase in ESOPs recently so that they kind of lock in these employees or give them some additional benefit when we're not coming together in buildings and organizations? Or have you seen ESOP level off, or is it in decline? Where do you see
Oh,
ESOPs
no.
going?
The ESOP market is booming.
Yeah.
But the reason for that is the aging of the baby boom generation. So
Mhm.
that's that group of people that was born between 46 and 64. So that generation is now reaching the age where they want to cash in on their life's work. And that's what's driving this tremendous generational growth that we're seeing in ESOPs. Before this, you would see growth in ESOPs that would be based on changes to the tax law. So in 1984, Congress added Section 1042 to the code that allowed for this tax-free exchange that we talked about a minute ago. There was a big boom in ESOP activity as a result of that. Then in the late 1990s, Congress allowed S corporations to establish ESOPs. Before that, it was only a C corp that could establish an ESOP. So that generated a whole nother boom in ESOP activity. But those would be short-lived, 2 to 5 year big increases in activity. What we're seeing now is a sustained ESOP or increase in ESOP activity that is all related to the sustained increase in liquidity and exit planning that we see, whether it's a sale to a financial buyer or to a strategic buyer or to an ESOP. There's a big increase in activity that's driven by demographics, the aging of the baby boom generation.
Well, and it it almost, like we a lot of our clients end up selling at some point, right? And we see that the hardest part about that sale is the owner exiting, like they want to sell, they want to monetize it, but they don't necessarily want to stop working. They don't want to
Yep.
work as hard, right?
Yep.
So it almost seems like an ESOP is an ideal situation because they could continue, like maybe at a more limited capacity or kind of transition over a longer time period. Is that a draw for business owners and founders?
It's a tremendous draw. No, you're exactly right. That motivates a lot of people to make the decision to sell to an ESOP. They often want to transition from day-to-day activity to more of a strategic role. So we often see as part of the ESOP, the owner transitioning from CEO to chairman of the board, and at the same time elevating someone internally to the CEO role. And the chairman of the board who had sold in the ESOP transaction is there as a mentor to provide guidance and to help with the transition for all of the new responsibilities that have fallen on the shoulders of the new CEO. So it can be a great, not just ownership transition, but also management transition strategy.
Yeah. And I've often counseled people that are considering an ESOP to reach out to people that are specifically working in the ESOP area, kind of because I think business owners are a little bit concerned about the regulatory stuff, right? Like there's rules, the IRS, the DOL, what are some of the, like, is it really as scary as people think? Or is that why we have, advisors that are very specifically in this space? Like, what is scary about some of these regulations and what should we not be concerned about?
Yeah, I don't think that there is anything to be scared of, but ESOPs are complex. I had a brilliant mentor when I first got into the ESOP business 40 years ago, graduate of Harvard Law School. He ran the biggest ESOP practice for a big national law firm. And one day I was talking to him after we had had a client meeting, and I said, Jerry, this stuff is so complicated. I said, I don't know how you do this. He said, Kelly, it's not complicated. I said, wait a minute. We were talking about all of these rules and regulations that are imposed by the IRS and the DOL. And he said, Kelly, ESOPs are complex. He said, there's a difference. He said, the theory of relativity is complicated. He said, I've studied it. And he said, I can't understand it. He said, all of these concepts that we've discussed with clients about ESOPs, he said, you understood every one of them, and the client did too on its own. He said, so all of the basic concepts are easy to understand. The problem is when you put all of those concepts together in designing an ESOP transaction, they work against each other. And that's complexity. The ability to put your arms around all of these easy to understand concepts and make sure that they all work together, moving in the right direction as opposed to bumping into each other. And so I think that is one of the big disadvantages of ESOPs is that complexity. But let's face it, selling to private equity has its own set of complexities. And so there is no simple way to exit a business. There are so many considerations. You need professional advisors, and you need more than one. I mean, I call ESOPs a big tent strategy. There are lots of roles for professional advisors and their own niche specialty in every ESOP transaction. And so you get the right people together, people who not only know the concepts technically, but can communicate those concepts in an easy to understand way, which is what I think our secret sauce is. And you can help a business owner demystify ESOPs to the point where they're not scary at all.
Well, and a lot of times when we get involved, it's, a company calls us and says, can you give us a preliminary valuation on our company because we're thinking about doing an ESOP. And we can certainly come in, and we do encourage them to just do a preliminary, not a valuation, not a report, just get a range of value to see what the expectation is going to be. Now, then we usually encourage them to, consult with, somebody like yourself that would come in as the benefit of the employees and the fiduciary or the trustee to value it. Now, in that transaction, do you see that whoever the trustee hires to do the value, are they creating the valuation and then giving it to the owners? And that is the negotiation is here, you need to be above this number, or
no, absolutely not. And that can be a frustration point with the business owner. They say, we're going to pay for this valuation for the trustee's valuation advisor, but we're not going to get to see it. Yep, that's right. You don't get to see it. And that's exactly the same situation if you're selling to any third party. If you're selling to private equity, they've got a team of financial analysts who are telling the representatives of the private equity firm the most that they can pay for this company and still give their investors the return they expect. And so the job of the private equity firm representative is to negotiate the lowest price possible and to certainly not negotiate a price that's above that number that their analysts have given them. Exact same situation within an ESOP. You've got this valuation advisor who's the financial analyst for the purchaser, the ESOP trustee, and they give the trustee that number, and the trustee is going to negotiate for as low a number as possible. And we, representing the sellers, are going to negotiate for a price that is the highest number possible.
And it could be that if you had other offers, that's also giving you an idea of the market. What are the typical like financing structures that are used in ESOPs to transact? Like the employees are now, we see this a lot in like construction companies. And so you have, there's tangible goods and there's buildings and assets and things like that. But are you seeing this kind of seller financed? Are you seeing they're going to a bank and, that the majority of this is being paid out to the owner? Like, what are some of the common things that you see in those financing structures?
There are three sources of capital that finance almost every ESOP transaction: excess company cash, a bank loan, and seller notes. And so let's say we had a company hypothetically that had a value of $20 million. That company might be able to borrow $8 million from a bank. Perhaps they've got $2 million of excess company cash that's not needed for operations. So now those two sources of capital have provided $10 million, half the purchase price, and that's paid to the owner at close. And then the owner takes back a seller note, which is an IOU issued by the company to the selling shareholder. That seller note is going to be subordinated to the bank debt. And as a result of that subordination, it's going to be entitled to a subordinated debt type of return, which in today's market is about 12%. And so often our business owner clients hear about seller debt and they react negatively because it's a deferred payment and everybody knows that a bird in the hand's worth two in the bush. But when they find out that their all-in return is going to be 12%, often they say, wow, I want as much of that as I can get. That's going to be the best investment in my portfolio, a 12% return on an asset that I feel very confident in. And so, yeah, those are the three sources of capital that we see. There can be some more esoteric sources of capital, but those are the basic sources of financing of every ESOP transaction.
And then maybe one of our last questions could kind of be, if I'm sitting here as a business owner and I'm kind of considering this whole ESOP because maybe I want to purchase things, maybe I want to, get some of the equity out, but still be a part of it. What would you tell me are some pitfalls or mistakes or things that I should definitely avoid? Like, how can I be proactive in this process so that we're really doing what's best, we're getting the best tax advantages and things like that? Like, what would be your advice if you were staying there? Because I know you talk to businesses like this every single day. Like, what do you tell them as a big picture kind of view?
Hire good advisors. The same as in any business transaction, the key to success is hiring good advisors. And so that means specialists who have the technical expertise and the experience. So much of what I've learned has been a matter of experience over the last almost 45 years. And so you don't want to work with someone who might be your CPA or your lawyer who's been exposed to 2 ESOP transactions in their career. You want to work with somebody who's doing 10 ESOP transactions each year and has been doing that for at least a couple of decades, and that knows all of the pitfalls to avoid and knows how to maximize structure and tax benefits for the selling shareholder.
Yeah. And even from a valuation standpoint, like I think a lot of times people are like, well, this valuator has been like, I've been doing valuations for 20 years. I would still say the same advice. ESOPs are so very nuanced that it's almost like it's the classic case of you could just have an advisor that doesn't know these issues and that, not only, but is it really not only like advisors and valuation people, but also attorneys that have experience in the ESOP land? Are you typically bringing in some of that team if people don't know all of those people? And it doesn't mean that you're going to find a local person. Like, you almost have to get out of that mentality that, you're really looking for somebody that is nationally recognized, and not just, oh, I want somebody in my backyard. You might not find somebody in your backyard. Like, there's not a tremendous amount of companies that focus on ESOPs, I think. Or am I wrong about any of these things?
No, you're exactly right. And so our business is very national. I mean, last year We closed a transaction in Seattle and in South Carolina and 10 places in between. And so everybody in the ESOP business, all of the trustees, the valuation advisors, the ESOP consultants, which is our role, even the lenders have specialized units. And so, for example, a large national money center bank that has offices throughout the country, they might have an ESOP specialty team in Chicago or New York that works with the local lenders. So yeah, it is such a niche specialty practice that you probably are going to have to look past your backyard to find the people with the experience. Those people are going to be more than willing to work in connection with your existing advisors. And so it's not as if you're elbowing somebody out of the process. So for example, the lawyer, we might recommend ESOP specialty counsel that works alongside the company's existing corporate attorney, and they often work very well together.
Yeah, and I didn't even consider like the banking side of it as well. Like that is a good point. Now, the other, like one last thing, and we're going to talk a little bit about you, is, in this space, we also have a lot of valuation people that are watching this podcast. Like, do you see that there is opportunities for valuation people to specialize, or do you see firms hiring in that space? And what are some opportunities there if you would be interested, maybe reaching out to you or getting any special training?
I think that it is a great opportunity for valuation advisors because it's a rare opportunity for a valuation advisor to be able to build a recurring stream of revenue, which is what an ESOP does. You mentioned the fact that we're going to have this valuation work done on the front end, but then there's going to be annual valuations for as long as that ESOP is in existence. So that's a rare opportunity. If a valuation firm is not in that space currently, I'd be glad to talk to them about things that they should consider in order to get in there. But the key is the trustee hires the valuation advisor, and the trustee has an approved list of valuation advisors. So the place for the valuation advisor to start is we can tell them who they should go to in the trustee world for them to fill out the paperwork that's necessary for the trustee to do its due diligence to get them on their approved list. One of the things that the trustee is going to ask for is a sample valuation report.
Okay. Well, and I think that a lot of times we see people that are in the ESOP space in larger companies. Like there's, more protection to learn, to figure out things in a company, or that has a leader that has 40 years of experience, so how can people kind of reach out to you if either they have questions from a business perspective of, maybe working with you to convert to an ESOP, or if they have questions, about the field? Tell us a little bit about you and your firm, and we'll kind of show how to reach out to you as well.
Okay. We're an ESOP consulting firm. ESOPs are all that we do. So if a company is interested in selling to private equity, we're not the right people to contact. If they've made the decision that they want to explore whether or not an ESOP is appropriate, then they can go to our website and get more information about who we are and what we do, and educational information about ESOPs. They can call me, and I'm glad to have an initial consultation without any fee, or they can email and do that same thing. And so we're always more than happy to talk to business owners and help them understand whether or not they might be a candidate.
Okay, that's awesome. I think that, there's so much to know about this topic, but the reality is you can do a whole bunch of research and it's just so nuanced. It's going to be more advantageous for you to reach out to an expert. And even other valuation experts recommend that you reach out to an ESOP expert. So this isn't just, marketing. This is really, there's a lot of benefits for business owners to go into this space, to exit, and, as an owner that wants to stay, but know what you're getting into and do that first consultation. So we appreciate all the information that you've provided, and we hope to see you again soon.
Great, Melissa. Thank you very much.
Thank you.